Hey everyone, I'm John McEnany. I'm a fourth-year PhD candidate in Benjamin Good's lab at Stanford, and let's get into rapid evolution in a fluctuating environment. So we know that evolution generally depends on the environmental state. What this means is that if we take some organism, get a bunch of mutants of that organism shown in pink, we can measure their relative fitness in one environment and construct a distribution. But then we take those same mutants, measure the fitness in a new environment, and this one-dimensional distribution will become two-dimensional. Some mutations might be beneficial in both environments, some might be deleterious in both environments, and some might be beneficial in one or deleterious in another. And a lot of people have done this experimentally for Bacteroides in the mouse gut or yeast under different growth conditions. And in both these cases, we can see these distributions are generically two-dimensional, and there's not always any obvious underlying structure. So let's imagine that we have some organism. Let's imagine that we have some organism with access to mutations that form one of these sort of blob-shaped distributions in two-dimensional space. And the basic question I'm going to ask is, how can we predict which of these mutations are going to be successful? Now, if the environment is constant, this question maybe isn't so hard. Roughly speaking, they'll be the mutations with the highest fitness in that environment. But we know that natural environments often fluctuate between different states, and then this problem becomes a bit harder. For example, one guess might be that the best mutations will be those that have weak or no trade-offs, by which I mean that they have similar fitness in both environments. So I'm using a pretty broad definition of trade-offs here. That makes sense. This highlighted mutation is unconditionally beneficial, so it makes sense it would do well. But we could also have mutations like this one, which we could say have strong trade-offs. For example, this mutation is really beneficial in environment 2, but is actually deleterious in environment 1. It'd be great if you all could think on your own about which of these you'd expect to do better in various situations. And in general, this could depend on the structure of the environmental fluctuations, things like its time scale, whether it's periodic or stochastic. So the answer might change. And I might try to poll you all later if I have time. So that means we need to turn to theory to get a sense of what we should expect. And theory first gives us some really simple limits that are kind of intuitive and could tell us what fluctuating environments do. So let's imagine a really simple case where we have a two-state environment which switches periodically, so deterministic, with timescale tau. If tau is really small and fluctuations are fast, we might expect that mutations see some kind of average environment. Because not much is happening in a single environmental state, average fitness will be the main determinant. Conversely, if tau is very large and fluctuations are slow, individual mutations might be able to fix or go extinct in a single environmental state. So again, those statistics will mostly be determined by a single environment. However, that leaves this intermediate timescale where fluctuations happen here, the environment doesn't fall into one of these sort of easy constant environment limits. And so the first question we might ask is, I love separation of timescales. Why should I even care about this intermediate range? Is it worth worrying about? And in fact, for large populations, this intermediate range is pretty large. For instance, we can look at the Lenski long-term evolution experiment, which is a large population of E. coli. And here I'm showing you a Muller diagram where each color represents a beneficial mutation, and we can see them rising and falling in frequency in the population. And the fitness effects of individual mutations can be felt in days or tens of days, but mutations can take months or up to a year to reach fixation. So any fluctuation that falls in this intermediate range will be in this sort of difficult to predict regime. But there's another thing you might notice in this plot, which is that at any given time, there's often many beneficial mutations competing with each other. And this turns out to be key. We really need to understand the effects of environmental fluctuations in a regime where beneficial mutations compete, which is another hallmark of large populations. To clarify what I mean here, a lot of theory, including theory to deal with environmental fluctuations, focuses on the successive mutations or SWIM regime, where individual mutations arise one at a time and fix or go extinct before another appears. However, if we take a population in this regime and increase the population size or the mutation rate enough, we'll eventually cross over into the rapid adaptation regime, where beneficial mutations compete with each other. And here we need new approaches and new theory to understand environmental fluctuations, and this will be the focus of my talk. So now we need to go to a more concrete model. And the first thing I'm going to do is say I don't want to deal with a sort of blob-shaped distribution. I'm going to make some big simplifying assumptions, which will give me a coarse-grained set of mutations. So I'm going to go from this plot to this plot. And here I'm showing you essentially the same thing, the fitness effects of mutations available to a focal organism in 2D fitness space. but the plot on the right only shows the mutations corresponding to the arrows on the left. And you can see that I essentially have two types of mutations here. So I have generalist mutations shown by the black arrow, and these are mutations with no trade-offs. They just have a constant fitness benefit S regardless of the environmental state. And I also have specialist mutations, which are shown by the red and blue arrows. And these are mutations with fitness effect S plus or minus S tilde, where the sign depends on the environmental state. So these mutations have an environmental preference parameterized by this S tilde parameter, which you can think of as the trade-off strength. How much better can I do in one environment at a corresponding cost in the other? And all these mutations, importantly, have the same average fitness effect. So we're really focusing on the importance of the trade-off here. And I'll make the additional assumption that any organism, regardless of its genetic background, has access to a bunch of these mutations. And so these mutations can be acquired at some constant rates, and they'll just add together without any epistatic interaction. And of course, this is only interesting if we have a fluctuating environment. And now we can generalize a bit more by adding in the possibility of stochasticity. So imagine a two-state environment which switches periodically with timescale tau, but we can also add in a stochastic component parameterized by sigma tau. So that's really all there is to the model. At this point, it's basically Wright-Fisher simulations in theory. But the first thing I might ask is, the main quantity that I'm going to be plotting here is the fixation probability of specialists relative to generalists, so the advantage that specialists have. And I don't know if anyone has any strong opinions here, but if we could do a quick show of hands, does anybody think that these will be basically kind of the same thing? Like, oh, they have the same average fitness, so they'll perform similarly. OK. Anyone think specialists will do a lot better? OK. We're getting some hands. And does anyone think that the generalists without trade-offs unconditionally beneficial will do better? OK, so I think all of those are very reasonable instincts, and I'm being a little unfair here because I haven't told you all the parameters, and there's probably regimes where all of those are true. But I think it's fair to say that our intuition might be that these trade-offs are kind of dangerous because things could go really badly for you if the environment is bad. Maybe you can see the axes here that that's not necessarily right. But here I'm showing the specialist advantage, so how many times more likely is a specialist mutation to fix than a generalist as a function of the trade-off strength. And for small population sizes, I would call this pretty close to 1. Maybe there's a factor of 2 or 3 difference, but it looks like average fitness seems to be an important determinant here, and whether you have trade-offs doesn't matter a lot. But then I'm going to crank up the population size from 10 to the 4 to 10 to the 10, and now something interesting happens. The specialist advantage skyrockets to the point that specialist mutations are 10 times or 100 times more likely to reach fixation than generalists. And if we add in stochasticity, so there's the open circles with sigma tau greater than 0, this advantage goes up even further. So why is this the case? Again, these mutations have the same average fitness. Why are these specialists so favored to survive? And one clue comes to that plot that I showed you earlier. When we increase n, we move from the successive mutations regime to the rapid adaptation regime. So maybe the specialist advantage really depends on being in an environment where you're competing with other beneficial mutations. So that means we need a theory to deal with the rapid adaptation regime. And a powerful tool here that's been used in the past is traveling wave theory. The idea here is that in an environment where many beneficial mutations are arising each generation, at any given time, there'll be a diversity of genotypes present in the population. This looks complicated, but a big simplification we can make is that we can sort these genotypes by their average fitness between environments, basically their number of beneficial mutations. So with the magic of Google Slides transitions, we can do that and get a distribution of fitnesses, which is now a mathematical object that we can deal with more easily. And so this is the wave part of traveling wave theory. And the traveling part is that over time, new mutations will be acquired and be selected on. So eventually, this wave will found a new fitness class, an organism with, say, 6 beneficial mutations. And the wave as a whole will move to the right at some rate of adaptation v. And the key point of this regime is that founding new mutations is key to a lineage's survival. It's not enough just to have one beneficial mutation. In order to reach fixation, you need to keep up and even outpace the rest of the wave. So the basic mathematical tools that I'm working with are tools that analyze this process of founding new mutations. So the first thing that I would do is imagine that I got a lineage in the high fitness edge of this wave and ask how long it takes to found a new beneficial mutation. and form a new fitness class. And to do this, I can just take this integral, which is basically just the number of mutations that you founded in time t mut, and ask at what point that's equal to 1. The first factor here is just the rate at which you can establish new mutations and have them escape genetic drift. And the second factor is just the number of individuals in the source class. So this n times f of t term will look basically like exponential growth with rate x, except that this rate will fluctuate depending on the environmental state if we have a specialist mutation that prefers a certain environment. And so now this looks like a really kind of nonlinear average. We're multiplying by an exponential. So now you can maybe see why environments might not always average out. So once we calculate t mut, the recursive part of our calculation is that t mut will actually determine the relative fitness of the class that this organism founds. And this is a pretty simple equation. The fitness in the next class will be the fitness in the old class plus the fitness effect of the mutation. But then you've taken some time to found that mutation. The rest of the population is caught up in the meantime. And so that's where we get this minus VT mut term from. And so here you can see that what I mean by you need to outpace the rest of the population. You need your lineage to be growing faster than everybody else. And if we take a step back and look at these equations heuristically, the first equation tells us that the larger x is, the faster you'll grow, and the sooner you'll found a new mutation. So that makes t mut smaller. And the second equation tells us the smaller t mut is, the larger fitness in the next class will be, because you've given less time for competitors to get mutations. And if you put those effects together, you can see that small differences in fitness tend to compound over time. This is a hallmark of the rapid adaptation regime. And what it means is that in order for a mutation to fix, it almost always needs to be beyond a critical fitness threshold, which is to the far right-hand side of this wave. So only really mutations on really high fitness backgrounds will be able to survive. Otherwise, they'll be rapidly outpaced by mutations that are on those backgrounds. And so basically, all we have to do here is take this sort of recursive process and use it to track the rate at which you found beneficial mutations over many different environmental cycles and founding steps. And the basic question we're asking is, does the specialist tend to outpace its competitors? And for the moment, I'm talking about a periodic environment. So it looks like in that case, it depends on when the mutation arises. So if we have our new specialist mutation, in principle, it could arise at any time in a periodic environmental cycle. If it arises at the beginning of a beneficial period, let's say it prefers the red environment, then at first it'll get a head start in founding new mutations, and that head start will compound over time to beat out a generalist mutation that arose at the same time. Conversely, if it arises at the start of a deleterious period, it'll fall behind generalists initially and never fully catch up. And so this, if we zoom in on just one of these environmental cycles, this gives us a prediction theoretically as to how the specialist fixation probability should depend on establishment time. And indeed, that agrees with simulations. So we see this really strong exponential dependence where mutations that arise at the optimal time at the beginning of a beneficial period are more likely to fix. And the overall fixation probability is just averaging over establishment time. And because this is an exponential function on a log scale, that average will be dominated by mutations that arise near the optimal time, and that pulls the specialist mean above the generalist mean. So we can use that to put theory predictions on our earlier plots, and we see that the overall specialist advantage scales with the trade-off strength as well as the environmental fluctuation time scale in a periodic environment. So this top factor is just the advantage for specialists that arise at the exact right time, and the bottom factor is the chance that they arise at the right time as opposed to a bad time. And we see that there's reasonable agreement with simulations. So that's for a perfectly periodic environment, but now we can extend this thinking to include stochasticity. The basic effect of stochasticity is that environmental states will no longer perfectly average out. If the red state usually lasts tau over 2 generations, now it might last tau over 2 plus sigma tau generations. So scaling with the effect of the stochasticity. And what that means is that lower fitness lineages can potentially be rescued if they happen to encounter a lucky sequence of environments, if they spend longer in the environment that they do better in. And this effect will be stronger, of course, for specialist lineages because those are the ones that care about the environmental state. So the overall effect of this is that this range of mutations that are likely to fix that I showed you earlier actually extends backward by an amount that scales with sigma tau. And that has the effect of increasing the overall fixation probability. How much it does so really depends on how frequent specialist mutations are. So when specialist mutations are really rare and there's only one specialist mutation in the population at any given time, that lineage will get a massive advantage if you add in stochasticity. You can see it's like 1 billion times, 1 million times more likely to fix than a generalist. So that's pretty wild. If we increase the specialist mutation rate, though, then every lineage in the population will be able to respond to stochasticity, and that means the effect of a single specialist mutation will matter less. So you still get an advantage, but it's closer to the 10 times, 100 times plots that I was showing you earlier. And we can extend our theory to account for this to get those curves. A nice way of summarizing all these results to wrap up is with fixation probability isoclines. So these are curves of constant fixation probability in 2D fitness space. You can see that the black curve corresponds to only average fitness mattering. So that would maybe have been my null expectation before doing this project. And when you favor trade-offs, this curve should kind of bend inward. And unsurprisingly, that is what we see. So in both periodic and stochastic environments, we see this effect. Periodic environments are that black curves in points. And so it sort of bends in just a little bit relative to the straight line. But as we crank up stochasticity, it bends further and further back, favoring trade-offs more and more, even to the point that mutations that look deleterious on average actually have the same fixation probability as mutations that are unconditionally beneficial. And yeah, just some overall takeaways are that in this regime where beneficial mutations are common, it's good to care about the environment, even if you don't get an average fitness boost, because it helps you get lucky and found future mutations more quickly. And the most successful lineages will be those that in retrospect got the right mutations at the right times, especially corresponding to the environments that appear right after it establishes. And this was a really simple, boring two-state model. But I expect similar principles should apply beyond it. One thing I've been thinking about is maybe if you add in ecology. So you could have like phages preying on bacteria, and then the most successful bacteria will be those that happen to acquire resistance genes or resistance cassettes right before that phage started rising in frequency. So in general, this thing applies to lots of circumstances where you have mutations that care about the environmental state. Great. I'd like to thank the Good Lab and the organizers. It's been a really fun conference. And sorry. Yeah.
Maybe use the handheld mic to answer questions.
Oh yeah.
This time.
Hey. Yes. Hello. I can just talk loudly.
So I learned in kindergarten that you can solve all these problems with geometric mean fitness. So whatever happened to that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I was just looking at those papers this morning. I thought somebody asked me. I think the basic difference is that when you have the geometric mean fitness, that's basically saying that your fitness gives you an exponential growth rate. And when you kind of average that, you get a geometric mean instead of an arithmetic mean. But here, the key point is not your exponential growth rate. It's your ability to found future mutations. So that lineage that I showed you, after it founds the next mutation, it'll keep on exponentially growing. It'll look like it's doing well. But eventually, all the other lineages will catch up and it'll die deterministically. So you only survive through your ancestors. And that means that it's not the simple exponential growth. Yeah, Jason? Or...
Actually, I was wondering, so if you have all these specialists fixing, did you think about the sort of long-term repercussions for the population, that there are all these specialists and they're still in a fluctuating environment?
Yeah, that's a good question. So this is sort of maybe in the soft fitness regime where population size remains constant. So there's not really any mechanism for the population to crash after you accumulate 10 billion specialist mutations and then it becomes cold one day. But you could imagine sort of incorporating that and extending this model. In this case, like only relative fitness matters, so it doesn't really matter how many have fixed. But one implication you do get is that this effect where the most successful lineages are those that got the right mutations at the right times. So if you look at the kind of history of successful mutations, they'll kind of track environmental states and even anticipate them. Yeah.
Something I missed. Simple. Is this like you're just having a traveling wave where there's only specialists and only generalists, or do you have multiple kinds of mutations happening at once?
Yeah, good question. So in principle, we have multiple mutations happening at once. That's sort of related to this point about rare or frequent specialists. So when you're a rare specialist, almost everyone's a generalist except for one, then the math is a bit easier. When you're a frequent specialist, you need to throw more approximations at the wall to make things work. But in principle here, every lineage can just acquire a sequence of specialist and generalist mutations, and then they kind of have to in order to succeed and match the changing environments.
So they have to have both or they'll fall behind.
Yeah, they have to have both in the regime on the right. And on the left, there's only one lucky thing that has any.
Okay.